What in the name of fuck is that? Shit.
What's up everybody, and welcome back to the channel and to part 2 of my Revisiting Outriders series, where we look at each one of the 4 characters and the effect that the buff patch from the 12th of August had on them, and whether it changed our look at some of the builds and the viability of those builds. In each one of these videos I will be targeting one of the 4 characters that you can pick and looking at builds that I consider that I would run, but that are also viable for solo and group play. Today we're looking at the Devastator. The previous video was the Trickster, and definitely just as a sort of starting off point, I think that Devastator is not in the best place right now in terms of build diversity. You obviously have to be playing a anomaly based Devastator to kind of like compete with the other characters in terms of damage. But we do have 2 different builds that we're going to look at today, and hopefully there's something interesting for you here that you might want to consider building and running. I just think that you have a lot more options with the other classes as to the way that you want to play, where generally speaking you're kind of pigeonholed into either a gravity leap Devastator or a bleed Devastator, or some kind of weird combination of the 2. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and jump right into the builds. However, before we do that, let's go ahead and look at the patch notes first and see exactly what was changed with this buff patch. And when we look at the Devastator, we can see that 3 of the skills were looked at in this pass. The first one being Boulder Dash, where it now says that using this skill will now provide significant damage reduction during its animation, which is a massive 65% damage reduction there. Also, it says players can now press trigger again to use an AoE attack during the run animation. So you can essentially cancel the Boulder Dash early. That's pretty cool. It makes it a little bit more versatile. I do, however, I have a problem with this skill because I feel like you kind of like get the effect of the skill already by just doing a running melee. It's weird. I've always thought that this skill needed to be combined with something else, but in any case, that's just me. Then when we look at Endless Mass, and this is, we'll spend a little bit of time here just talking about this, because the changes that they've made to Endless Mass here is a game changer and makes the skill extremely juicy. And that's that enemies afflicted rather by Endless Mass can now be damaged and killed during the animation. Now previously what Endless Mass would do is it would drop the brick and then it would pull stuff into it, and then during that time those things, they were taking damage from Endless Mass, but they couldn't take damage from anything else. Now essentially you have a skill that pulls everything into a central area and then allows you to dump your skills on them and basically deal a lot of damage to them, which one of the builds that we're going to look at today definitely benefits a lot from. The second change to Endless Mass is that when you use the Wide Horizons mod, on top of the range increase, so what Wide Horizons does is makes the pull-in effect of Endless Mass much bigger. So on top of this range increase, this mod also allows Endless Mass to basically ignore Absorbing Skin, which is a damage prevention skill that Alpha Perforos and Broodmothers can use. So you can essentially penetrate that shield or that damage prevention and deal additional damage to them, which again is a very, very good thing. Then the third skill that's affected as well is of course Reflect Bullets, which says ending the skill early will now refund part of the cooldown. So you can basically have Reflect Bullets up, but then once everything is dead you can end the skill early if it hasn't ended already, and you actually get some of the cooldown back, which again just allows you to pop it up again when you get into the next fight, which is also a pretty cool change. I don't mind that at all, but yeah. Okay, so let's get started with the builds. The first one we're going to look at is a Seismic Commander build, and it's very much the bread and butter of a Devastator, and in other words, what I mean by that is you're going to be focusing on utilizing bleed and the dot damage from bleed and essentially stacking as much of that. Now let's go to the skills first, because then we'll understand the mod choices a little bit better on the armor. But when we look at the skills, we're going to be using Earthquake, we're going to be using Impale, and we're going to be using Endless Mass. Now as you can see, the cooldowns on all these skins are super low because, or not skins, damn mouth, the cooldown on all these skills are super low because of course we're also stacking cooldown reduction in this build. So you'll see extremely low Earthquake, relatively low Impale, and a relatively low Endless Mass as well. Now when we go to the actual gear, let's go ahead and first talk about weapons. Weapons is straightforward kind of in the way that, because this is an anomaly build, your best bet, and not the only bet. You can definitely use other things. I like to fool around with this darkness charmer with grand opening and scrap grenade on. It's fun, it's kooky, it does big damage to anything that's basically standing together. But your most efficient is going to be the cookie cutter fortress from the death shield, and then the same thing, having an anomaly with moaning winds and fortress on there, and another round of moaning winds. The point is, all of the Devastator builds, not just this one, you generally are in the thick of it. You're generally like in the midst of a whole bunch of creatures. So being able to benefit from the AoE that you get from moaning winds is huge, and just makes you, deal out that much more damage. Does it mean that without those, this build doesn't work? No, not at all, because there are other ways for you to, of course, build your weapons, because the majority of the damage of anomaly builds like this one always comes from your skills. So because it's not a weapon-based build, the augmentation that you're getting from Fortress and the additional damage is great, but it's not necessary. You'll just be slower, you'll just be less efficient without it. But that's basically the point of it. Now, I do use Shadow Combat on here, and the reason for this is, as we were just talking about Endless Mass and how it pulls everything basically closer, is the combo here is beautiful because you can Endless Mass something which pulls them all into a group. Then you can dump all your skills on them, and if something still happens to be alive, you can hit them with a comet, which also drops everything on them, on the group of mobs that are around the Endless Mass. Or you can just open up with that. So it's a fantastic way for you to just do a whole bunch of AoE damage to everything that has just now been pulled closer to one another to allow the AoE to sort of blanket everything. Now, as an overall point to the stats that you're looking for, of course you want anomaly power. I think that's a no-brainer. But then when it comes to the other two that you want from your substats, you definitely want cooldown reduction and you definitely want status power. Those are the two primaries. If for some reason you can't get one of those two and you have to substitute it with something else, then skills life leech is okay, but you definitely want to be getting as much cooldown reduction and as much status power as you can. The reason for cooldown reduction is self-explanatory. It means that your skills come off cooldown quicker and you can use them more often. And of course, the reason for status power is the fact that status power, how it works, is it affects your skills in different ways. If we highlight status power here, you can see that in the case of burning, toxic, and bleeding, it actually increases the damage of it, right? And in the cases of freeze, ash, vulnerable, and weakness, it actually increases the duration of the effect. Now, this is a bleed build, so what this does is it's just going to make those bleed ticks, those bleed dots, just hit for much harder. So the more status you have, the better. Now, you can see that with this build right here, I'm up to 150% status, and that's because I'm trying to get it from as many pieces as possible. So I have it, of course, on the head, I have it on the chest, I have it on basically all 5 of the pieces. Bonus points here if you take a weapon that also has status on. So again, like I said, you're definitely not confined to taking the death shield. You could be using something else, like for instance this darkness charmer here, which has status power, which just then further stacks your status up even higher. But getting back to our helm here is the first piece of the Seismic Commander's helmet. Now, of course, the reason why we're using the Seismic Commander set is because we're building a bleed build. So this set increases from its set bonus the damage towards enemies with bleed by 50%, which is massive. Now, the two skills that we have on here, or rather the two mods that we have on here, is Ultimate Impaler, which allows us to activate Impale 2 more times. And we have Second Quake on here, which allows us to get a second Earthquake. Then when we go over to the chest piece, we have Palisade, which means that now instead of your Impale hitting 1 target at a time, it can hit 3 at a time. And then we have Earth's Legacy, which increases the skills range, Earthquake in this matter, by 60%. Now, in terms of square or meters distance, I would imagine, and I obviously need to test this, but just off the top of my head, I would say that Quake is probably something like a 5-meter skill, but putting Earth Legacy on it makes it stretch all the way out to about 12 to 13 meters, which is massive, and it's definitely necessary. You are not using leap or anything in this build, so you don't have ways of closing distance to your targets very effectively. So you do want to be able to reach as far as possible with the earthquakes, and the point is also by increasing the range, you're just hitting so many more mobs at once, because you can it goes in a cone, so you can position it in a way that you can hit as many as possible. When we go over to the pants, we have Tainted Blood on here. Tainted Blood comes with the pants. It's the mod from the pants, and this increases the damage dealt to enemies afflicted with bleed by another 25%. So this 25% is stacked on the set bonus and just makes it much more powerful. We also use Blood Shock, and this is very, very important, because without Blood Shock, Earthquake doesn't cause bleed. it doesn't make the stuff that it hits bleed. So you need to be putting blood shock on you so that your earthquake actually makes the enemies bleed that it hits. On the hands, we're using ground crush, which just increases earthquake's skill, the base damage by a flat amount of 84k, which is massive. That makes it deal quite a bit more damage. And then on here we use Untamed Power. Now you have some options here. Instead of using Untamed Power, what you could also use is there's another buff, bleed buff, which adds 15%, which is a level 2 mod that you could put on there instead. Now you could put that on instead of Untamed Power, but what you have to remember is the way that we're building this, we have 3 earthquakes, 3 applications of Impale, and 1 Endless Mass. Plus our melee, which you should definitely be using with this build, also counts as a skill activation. So you are using your skill so often that you could get all this free damage from Untamed Power that every time when you basically activate a skill. So really weigh it up for yourself, whether you think that this does more damage or whether you think 15% additional damage to bleed does more damage over time. Definitely in my testing, this is insane, especially on monster maps where stuff is always trying to jump on you and very close to you and pushing you and rushing you. Then stuff is always within 5 meters of you and you just do all this free damage to it. When we go over to the last piece, which is the boots, here we have Sharpened Spike, which also increases the flat damage of Impale. Impale is one of our big damage dealers right next to Earthquake and right next to the bleed, so this is really good. And then we have our 3rd Earthquake activation here. That's basically it then in a nutshell. As we've seen here, we've looked at the skills. Then the point here is then in this build, essentially you just dump your skills on everything the whole time. So you walk into a fight, if there's a big enough cluster of enemies, you drop the Endless Mass right in the middle of them. This pulls all of the minions on top of one another. At this point in time, you can shoot once and get a shadow combo to drop on everything. Then you go Earthquake, 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 and whatever's left standing, you Impale, Impale, Impale. And generally speaking, nothing makes it through that combo, including bosses. So this is incredibly powerful, especially at dealing with clusters of enemies. And this build really shines in solo for being able to, if you're very good with your placement and if you're very good at hitting down your earthquakes in a way that it hits stuff and you funnel enemies nicely, it works really well. But this build is great in co-op as well, especially with the chains and Endless Mass, because you pulling all the mobs together allows your compatriots to also use their AoE abilities in a funneled way and using it on a bunch of stuff that are standing together. So just fantastic. Last but not least, of course, let's go ahead and look at the class tree. But this is, again, pretty standard. So if you're familiar with the Devastator and if you're familiar with building the Devastator in an anomaly configuration, then this is kind of like, I would say, the basic way to build it. So you're of course focusing on trying to pick up as much anomaly power as possible. You're also trying to pick up any cooldown slots that you can get additionally. Your first major one that you're picking up is Strong Arm of the Law, which doubles the damage of your class melee skill. Again, like I said, the class melee with the Devastator is super powerful because everything that melee hits also bleeds. Your bleeds are very powerful in this and cause you to be able to deal more damage to stuff when they are bleeding. So super powerful. This just doubles the damage of that. Then your second major one that you pick up is Protected by the Anomaly, which increases your armor bonus by 40% of your anomaly power. This is huge because, as you can see in our build here, we have no defensive abilities, but yet we're still, you can't see it right now because my big old mug is in front here, but we have 144k armor. Maybe it's good if I show that, because it's really like a great thing. So if I can quickly just there we go, you can see 144k, and this is me just standing around. So huge, because we have so much anomaly power, it's actually making us super tanky. Okay, so then the two last ones we can look at is Skilled Sentry, which says it increases your armor by 20% and resistance by 20% for 10 seconds when your skills end. So as soon as you've dumped all of those abilities, you've put like 3 earthquakes down, you put 3 impales down, you put an endless mass down, everything like that. If for some reason something is still alive and you have to kill some time and wait for your skills to refresh, which will happen quite quickly, you become quite tanky in that time that you have to wait an additional 10 seconds basically. This is a ridiculously tanky build, and you can pretty much be up in everything's face the entire time. and you should be just fine, because again, you are dealing so much damage, you're putting so much bleeds out there, everything like that, that you're just also getting a whole bunch of life back. The last part here is Earth's Heritage, which increases your seismic skills base damage by 50%. It's massive. You have to pick up this last node because it makes your earthquakes ridiculous, as well as your impales actually. But that's it for this build. I would say this is a fairly standard Seismic Commander build, but with the change that they made to Endless Mass, it makes it really viable, really good, and hella fun to play. Again, like I said, especially in a co-op environment. But that's it. When we then get to the second build, in this case we're going to be using the Marshall set. Now, while this build is still capable of doing solo content, no problemo, this build I would say is much more suited for co-op play because of the additional utility that you provide to your team with the debuffs that you are able to employ with the skills that you use, but also because this build features a lot of mobility, which generally the Devastator doesn't have unless you use something like Leap. And so this allows you to just move around the battlefield a lot more and actually become some kind of like a debuff monster and just hitting stuff. I've taken to calling the build Jumping Jack Flash, but let's kick it off by looking at the skills as we did with the other build. So when we go here, we'll see that in this case, as I've mentioned, we're using Gravity Leap. We're using Golem for some survivability because the way that we set this build up, we have a little bit less armor than we had with the previous build. So we just have to sort of help out a little bit with the survivability on this. Plus, since I said that this is more suited for a co-op situation, fights tend to last a little bit longer than they do singles. So you do need a little bit of help for survivability. Last but not least, we're still using Endless Mass because it's so good after the patch. But then when we go back, I'm keeping the same weapons and the same point that I mentioned before. The main reason why I have these weapons stacked here is because I want the 43% additional damage from Fortress, but also because I'm a Shadow Combat junkie and I love that skill. But you could use anything else in here. There are some great options, like for instance, if we just go over here to my box, I can show you as an example. What also is quite cute is something like Roaring Umbra with the kinetic stomps firing out the whole time. There's really there's no specific way to do this, and so I would definitely suggest that you experiment, because again, the majority of the build's damage and the utility from the build is actually going to be coming from the skills. So use any weapons that you want, but for sure Fortress makes a big difference and just makes you put out nice big numbers. So bear in mind that if you don't have Fortress on your weapon, you're going to be doing less damage. And when we go over to the actual armor pieces, the headpiece, now in this case here, the point is, since this is not a bleed build, our stats choices are a little bit different than the previous build. And in this case here, what we want is, we definitely of course want anomaly power. We do want cooldown reduction because we want our skills as fast as possible. But now, since it's not a bleed build, we don't need status power anymore. So now what we prefer rather to have is skills life leech. Skills life leech is just going to make all of your skills just return so much life back to you, and that's also going to help you with survivability in the cases where Golem is on cooldown or is just not helping you to stay alive enough. Now, firstly, we have Wide Horizons on here. This is the one that we mentioned in the mods as well, which increases the skill radius of Endless Mass by 25%, and it, as mentioned, takes off absorbent skin, is what they're calling it, off of the Brood Mothers and the Alpha Perforos. We have Human Combat on here, which increases the damage, flatly increases the damage of Gravity Leap, which is fantastic as well. Then when we go over to the chest, we have High Intensity, which is another Endless Mass mod, which says anomaly damage against affected targets increased by 33%. This is a fantastic debuff, and basically means that the minute that you use Endless Mass, the pyromancers that are with you, anybody that's dealing anomaly damage, tricksters, anything like that, another Devastator or something, are just going to notice a lot more damage being able to be dumped on the enemies because of the way that how it magnifies anomaly damage. It also magnifies your anomaly damage, because generally the combo with this build is that you put down Endless Mass and then you basically gravity leap onto the enemy twice, because you have access to 2 gravity leaps. The reason why 2 gravity leaps is also such a big deal is because you're using the second mod that we're going to look at here, and that's called Despair. Now, what Despair does is it says that enemies within the damage radius of where the gravity leap hits receive 1.5 additional anomaly damage for 5 seconds. Now, this can stack. So if you despair twice, there's a short window there where this magnifies damage massively. So again, as I said, while this build is fantastic and extremely cute to playing it solo, it goes absolutely crazy if you have a really good pyromancer with you, or a trickster like an anomaly trickster or something like that, because once you despair onto a boss or a group of enemies, they're going to be able to just deal out fat amounts of damage. And when we go over to the pants, we have power assimilation, which basically just gives you more anomaly power the more elites there are on the battlefield. You do want to be stacking your anomaly power as high as you can with this, because it's just going to make your skills deal that much more damage. Unstoppable force is really good here, because the way how we build this build in the skill tree, we are picking up a lot of resistance piercing nodes. And what Unstoppable Force does is it just keeps ramping up your anomaly power for the more resistance piercing you have. And this is a double-edged sword in a way, or you are double dipping on utility here, because not only is your anomaly power more powerful, meaning you deal more damage, you also have more resistance piercing, which means that you cut through any kind of resistance or shields or anything like that that a boss might have. So it's it's double good. When we get over to the hands, we're using Bone Crusher, which flat increases the damage of the Endless Mass. And we're using Captain Hunter because we want to be, as I've said, this is kind of like an assassin build. You are debuffing the bosses, and you're either taking them out yourselves by double gravity leaping on them, or you're setting them up in a way that the other guys can have a much easier way of taking them down. But either which way, Captain Hunter just helps you deal way more damage to the bosses. And then on the last piece, we have double jump. This is really important. We do want access to 2 gravity leaps. One is kind of is okay, but it really does shine if you have 2 of them, because you can double jump onto the same thing twice, which definitely ensures that it's fucking going to hell. Or you can double jump on something, it dies, and then immediately you can double jump somewhere else and continue on with your adventures. We're also using Untamed Power on here, and it's pretty much the same reason as why we used it in the previous build, and that is that, first of all, a lot of the time, especially if you're playing monster maps, you are the tip of the spear, so you're in front, you're attracting a whole bunch of attention, you're gravity leaping into stuff. So every application of a skill, again, including your melee, which with the Devastator, you should always be working into your rotation, you are applying this free anomaly damage every time you use a skill. So if in 15 seconds, you use 6 skills, one of them being melee as well, 6 times you apply this additional damage, which is phenomenal. Now, again, as we said with the skills, we have extremely low cooldowns here. So we have 9-second gravity leaps. So every 9 seconds, you have access to 2 gravity leaps. We have Golem on 14 seconds. Once you pop Golem, you're pretty much unkillable. I mean, really, unless you're standing in blue fire while a brood mother is hitting you and a behemoth is tackling you against the wall and someone is setting your room on fire or something like that. And then the third one, Endless Mass, you have a 9.1 second Endless Mass, which is a super low cooldown Endless Mass as well, just to basically deal a more AoE situation. Endless Mass does cause bleed, but this is not going to be the main way that we'll deal damage, but it's just a little bit of additional there, which is always handy. When lastly we go over to the skills tree, or the class tree rather, you can see that this builds kind of like an anomaly Devastator, but then what we do is we go a little bit up here to the north of the skill tree or the class tree. So again, let's look at it. The basic strategy is you want to be picking up as much anomaly power as possible. You do want to be getting Paladin here, because Paladin is phenomenal. It means that the minute you activate Golem, you actually increase your anomaly power by 45%, which is huge. It's basically it takes you 160 and pushes you up to like 250. Then just going up here, of course, we're trying to pick up as more cooldown reduction items. We do want Strong Armor of the Anomaly, because this stacks your resistance piercing through the roof. If you use your class ability as an AoE and there's 5 mobs around you, you get an additional 5 times 15% resistance piercing, which again pushes, because of the skill that we have here, because we have Unstoppable Force, it just again pushes our anomaly power through the roof. So we're also going all the way up here and saying that we increase our damage mitigation by 15% for 10 seconds after using a kinetic skill. Kinetic skills is leap, gravity leap, and it's Endless Mass. So we have 2 ways of basically activating this damage mitigation, which is fantastic. We're just getting more cooldown reduction here. Again, here we definitely want to be picking up strong armor of the law, and then we'll go here and we'll get skilled sentry, which again increases our resistance and our armor as soon as our skills are on cooldown and the effects have worn off. We're not going into the back end here because we're not using any of those skills, so this would do nothing for us. And as I said, we do go for the last node of pure anomaly here for additional resistance piercing. Now, just by default, this build, before you start messing around with stuff, has resistance piercing of 30% already. But once you start using your skills and everything like that, and like I said, if you time it just right to be able to pop an AoE melee, you can push your resistance piercing to above 100%, which has a pretty profound effect on your overall anomaly power and basically increases your damage by a whole shitload. But that's it for this build, and that's actually it for the video as well. These are the two builds that when I play a Devastator, I alternate between. As I've said, one I like a lot more for solo content, and that's of course the Seismic Commander one, and one I like a lot more for co-op content, and that's of course good old Jumping Jack Flash here. But that's it, as I said, for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. We've got 2 more videos in this series coming. The next one we're going to look at will be the Technomancer. And let me know in the comments down below how you build your Devastator, if this is interesting to you and if you're going to try these builds out. You know, which character is your favorite? Definitely in my time, I thought that the Devastator was going to be one of my favorites, but it's weird that I kind of I just felt a little bit underwhelmed by the class. I like the idea of the Devastator. I just think it's the class that's received like the least love out of the 4, and it really shows because, you know, it just seems that the other classes are more viable or have more build variety. But that's it. Thank you so much. The most important thing, of course, for me is that you have a fantastic morning, a great afternoon, and an awesome evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.